internet, my name is Sisley and welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to talk about my favorite music of the past decade. Now I know that saying it by song is going to be incredibly impossible because there have been hundreds of songs that I fell in love with over the past 10 years. There are so many songs that I fall in love with every single year, old and new. So that would be a little bit too much, let's agree with that. And even going by album, that would also be too much because when you talk about albums, you want to talk about each album, separately, and it also would take a while. So instead, I'm going to highlight some of my favorite artists and in general things that I loved in music, in pop music in this decade. I have a list of artists that I think were to me the most impactful, and this is nowhere near complete because I can't possibly remember and include every single artist that I enjoyed over this past decade. I mean, it's been 10 years and I listened to a lot of music, like a lot. So we're gonna talk about some of my faves, some of the highlights, and I hope I don't miss anything that I've written down. So basically, the decade started with my first favorite band breaking up. The band was called Cinema Bazaar, and they were my first band obsession, my first proper and true music obsession, and I was into them from like 2008 until they broke up in early 2010. But also 2009 and 2010 brought us some of the best pop music, in my opinion, that I've ever heard. Well, that's a little bit biased because at the time I was about 14, 15, and those are always your most formative years when it comes to music. That is when your music taste forms. So the pop music that came out in 2010 is very dear to me. I remember listening to Avril Lavigne, I listened to Owl City. Of course, Lady Gaga was at her peak, but we're gonna get to Lady Gaga later because she's not only one of the biggest artists of the decade, but also one of the most important artists to me personally. Hell, she's my favorite artist of all time. What am I even talking about? So, that was very important. I still consider 2010 to be one of the best years in music. Then 2011 came, and I remember thinking that summer didn't really have many hits that were that special, but now looking back, I look at those songs with nostalgia and they were great. Kesha is also one of the coolest artists that got popular in 2010 and 2011. I think that's when she had her peak, and I really did love her songs ever since TikTok. Of course, Katy Perry as well had her peak back then. Oh my god. Most of my favorite artists had their peak in that era, and I'm so sad that I wasn't really old enough to appreciate it, I guess. But yeah, and then came 2012. Now, they say that, being 17 is not like your most formative years, you're almost an adult, but 2012, in my opinion, had some of the most impactful music that I've ever heard. It had the best pop music style right when that sort of indie music started influencing pop songs more, and we heard stuff like Fun, for example. Well, let's talk about the band Fun and how they're my favorite band of all time, and they literally, Fun and Lady Gaga, are my two favorite artists of all time ever, and I don't know what it will take to change that because they're pretty deep set in there. So that whole style of pop music was wonderful, and it kept for a while. Like Taylor Swift's 1989, I think it came out in 2014, and it still had that style. In general, when I speak about the decades, especially during my Madonna marathon, when I spoke about different decades in pop music and how I feel about it, I now realized why I think 2010s is my favorite decade, aside from it being, well, pretty much, I lived through it and I was interested in music through that decade. It is because all those 10 years brought a big anthemic sound to pop music, whether it would be indie, electronic, rock. A lot of the songs had such an anthemic sound, and even now when people make generic pop songs for, let's say, movie soundtracks and stuff like that, a lot of times it's meant to be dramatic and very anthemic, and I will never get tired of that sound. Kind of the reason why I loved Tropical House so much as well is because it sounded big and it sounded grand and it sounded fun. So yeah, I just really love big anthemic and celebratory celebratory sound in pop music. So 2012 was the best year in pop music, in my opinion, ever. Aside from 2009, probably like those 2 years are tied for me. But yeah, next big highlight in this decade to me was, I think, 2016, when Tropical House really took off. And I feel like that summer had some of the coolest hits, like 2016 and 2017. I feel like those 2 years had some of the coolest hits in the later half of the decade. And that's once again just to my personal taste, because my idea of a good hit song is the fact that it's big and it makes you dream. It makes you daydream about cool things, and it just sounds like an adventure, you know? So that's my idea of a good song. That's my idea of an exciting song that I'm going to be coming back to years and years later. In general, I loved watching the evolution of electronic music throughout this decade. Well, electronic pop music, because as much as I say that I love electronic dance music, I never really delved into it further than what's on the radio. And to be honest, I'm really glad that electronic dance music has made its way into the radio, because that's one of the main things that makes this decade in music really great, in my opinion. But yeah, let's talk about the artists. I feel like I still need to talk about Lady Gaga and Fun, because Lady Gaga had her peak in about 2011. Her Born This Way album came out in 2011, and that is when I truly, absolutely, and unconditionally fell in love with her. Like, that was the time. Born This Way is my favorite Lady Gaga era, and that is the one that made me fall in love with her. Well, probably the one that spoke to me the most, and it spoke to a lot of other people, you know. She's just an amazing songwriter, an amazing artist, and thus far, since her big debut in 2009 and her following eras that just kept getting weirder and weirder, the controversy, nobody has had that much impact, you know? There were many people before her who did that, but since her, nobody really had that massive of an effect on the world. Lady Gaga was the person that changed and shifted a lot of things in the pop industry, and I truly have no words to accurately describe how much I love her and how much she means to me. She will always be my number one, and I will always love her. I have the same feelings for Fun, but sadly they're another band that was my favorite band that broke up. They broke up in 2014, but in the 2 years that they've been active and that I've been a fan of them, those were some of my best discoveries. And when I say Fun, I also kind of mean Bleachers and Nate Ruess in the same breath, because Jack Antonoff contributed a lot of key elements to Fun's sound that I absolutely love, so I adore Bleacher's music. And then Nate Ruess has an amazing voice, in my opinion, a very unique kind of voice that I could listen to for hours and hours and hours and hours, and he made that one solo album and he hasn't released anything since 2016, I believe, and I greatly miss him. But yeah, those kind of three artists, singular artists, go into that one group with Fun, because they're essentially, by the same people. And Fun had one of the most unique sounds, if not the most unique sound that I've ever heard. I was so desperate to discover more music like them. I was so desperate, and I still wish I could discover some music that sounds like them, but there is truly nobody that's like them. There are some artists that you're like, oh, if you like this artist, you're gonna like this. And it's, you listen to that other artist and it's true. Their style is pretty similar or whatever. But Fun had something that was so unique that I haven't heard anybody come even close to replicating that. So, I miss them dearly. I really hope they make a reunion someday. But, hey, let's not make this entire video about two artists. My other favorite artists from this decade were Taylor Swift, Ellie Goulding, Rihanna, Kesha and Sia as well are some of the most important artists to me personally. What they sing about is incredible, and their music and especially their lyrics always resonated with me. Britney Spears, of course, the icon. I think she had some amazing music this decade. Ariana Grande had a really good start at the start of this decade, actually the middle. I don't remember when her first album came out, but I really adored most of her earlier stuff. Jessie J was another artist that started very strong with her song Price Tag, and she's held on to her message ever since. I love her voice and the things that she sings about so much. Lana Del Rey and Marina and Tove Lo are also some of my favorites from this decade. I really enjoyed many of their songs and albums, and each of them have such an interesting and unique style. Nicki Minaj is another big one. I really loved her music, especially at the start of the decade. I loved how different and quirky she was, and her music videos were always fun to watch. Kim Petras is probably the most recent artist on this list, but I had to include her. I just had to. She's just such a cool discovery for me. Then of course, Pink. I know that she didn't really have her peak in this decade, but most of my favorite songs by her are from this decade. My favorite stuff by her is from her The Truth About Love album. I mean, just give me a reason. With Nate Ruth was definitely overplayed on the radio, but definitely one of my favorite songs that I've heard ever. It's still so good, and the music video was so good. Okay, enough. Owl City is also on this list once again. I know that his big hit was Fireflies, but I just really love his style. I always resonated with the way that he makes music. And I know that everybody's sick of Ed Sheeran, but I had to put him on this list because his first 3 albums are so profound. I mean, like, the reason why everybody fell in love with him in the first place was because he had that kind of honest image, you know, like very stripped down, and he had amazing lyrics and just, you know, just, it's a nice thing to listen to. It's a really, really soft and nice kind of music to listen to. I fell in love with his X album, and then Divide came out and I ate it all up. Then there's bands like Green Day who also put out some cool albums. My favorite album of theirs is actually Uno, which I know is not their most popular and not their most well critically acclaimed, but it was a really important album for me. Then Of Monsters and Men is a little bit more indie band. I'm sure most of you just remember their single Little Talks, but I love that entire album and I always come back to them when they release something new because I love their style. Imagine Dragons is also an amazing discovery for me because I really didn't like Radioactive or It's Time when those songs came out. But you know what I did love? I Bet My Life. That I think was the first Imagine Dragons song that I absolutely fell in love with, and it's still so good. So ever since then I've been falling in love with them more and more. And I feel like it's only fair to end this video by mentioning the one, the only, the iconic One Direction. It's truly a shame how much hate they got because there is not a single One Direction song that I don't like. There is not a single song by them that I would skip because like, ugh, this is so bad. Because honestly, I love cheesy pop music. I love basic ass, cheesy ass, repetitive ass pop music, and it just, you know, like even their earliest album is so fun. It's so good. And their later albums, I mean, Made in the AM and 4 are masterpieces, and I will not hear any criticism on that. I mean, they're just great, and they got a lot of unjustified hate because, as we all know, everything that teenage girls love gets trashed to infinity and beyond. It's happening to K-pop now again, as if we hadn't seen it happen before 1,000 times. So yeah, even though I wasn't a fan of One Direction back then, now they hold a very special place in my heart because it's just good music. I just love it. So this decade was amazing. It was inspiring. It made me fall in love with music more than ever before. It made me want to make my own music, which I did. I wasn't actually gonna talk about my music, but since I segued into this real nice, let's talk about my music too. I am very grateful for all of your love that you gave me on the songs that I released, especially this year because, you know, the earlier ones aren't as good. Okay, but really though, I am grateful for y'all. I'm glad y'all like my music, and if you haven't checked it out yet, feel free to do so. I always leave a link on the end screen, and there's links in the description of the videos as well. I just love music, and I love listening to music, and I love making music, I love writing music, I love singing, performing, and just everything about music is wonderful. So, I mean, I wouldn't be here talking to y'all if I didn't love music, and you wouldn't be watching this if you didn't love music. So yeah, I hope that the next decade brings even more amazing, groundbreaking, breathtaking music. Tell me what your favorite artists and albums were this decade, and thank you so much for watching this video, and I will see you next time. I love you guys. Bye!